I tried to warn them. The silence that cost everything. She found the bodies. She was the one who opened the door, saw the blood, screamed so hard her voice cracked. And still, no one really listened to her. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Not before, and maybe not even now. But Romy Reiner is done staying silent. Because when your entire family legacy lies in ruins, when your father, the legendary Rob Reiner, is zipped into a coroner's bag, and your stepmother is declared homicide by multiple sharp force injuries, there's only one thing left to say. I warned them. They didn't listen. And now, they're dead. What exactly did Romy try to warn them about? That's the question ripping through the Hollywood elite like wildfire. And it's the question we're going to peel apart, piece by piece. Because what really happened inside that $13.5 million Brentwood estate goes beyond a tragic crime scene. This is the story of buried secrets, of family dysfunction dressed in red carpet smiles, of ignored mental illness, of silence, denial, and consequences. But before we get to that final, horrifying December night, we need to rewind. To understand why this moment matters now, we have to go back. Not just weeks, not just months, years. Because what Romy allegedly knew, she didn't figure it out overnight, and neither did her parents. But by the time anyone took her seriously, it was too late. Way too late. The headlines didn't tell you this. December 14th, Sunday. The official timeline says the bodies were discovered in the early evening. Rob Reiner, 78, and his wife Michelle, 70, stabbed to death in the main residence. Their son, Nick Reiner, 32, was arrested just hours later. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He sat on the edge of his bed in the guest house, barefoot, reportedly humming something under his breath. Chilling. But it wasn't the police who first stepped into that nightmare. It was Romy Reiner, 29, artist, writer, the quieter Reiner sibling, the one who didn't follow the Hollywood path. She'd been trying to reconnect with her parents. A quiet dinner, she'd said. That's all it was supposed to be. Instead, she walked into a scene out of a horror film. The house lights dim, blood on the floor. No response to her calls. She dialed 911, shaking, crying. And when the officers arrived, she pointed straight at the guest house. "Nick," she said, "you need to check the guest house." But here's the part that wasn't in any press release. That wasn't the first time Romy said something like that. According to close sources, who we'll hear from later in this expose, Romy had warned her family for months. Some say years. She'd seen the signs, the breakdowns, the paranoia, the rage, and she had begged her parents to take it seriously. But they didn't. Or maybe they couldn't. The Reiner image, a Hollywood illusion? Let's be honest, Rob Reiner was Hollywood royalty. He directed A Few Good Men, When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride. He was the son of Carl Reiner, comedy legend. He grew up with Mel Brooks and Norman Lear as regular dinner guests. Rob wasn't just part of the industry, he was its heart. Michelle, his wife of 34 years, was less visible but just as respected in political circles. Activism, philanthropy, elegant appearances on red carpets beside her husband. To the public, the Reiners were liberal icons. Compassionate, intelligent, cultured. The kind of couple who spoke truth to power and still made time for family. But what if behind those polished interviews and carefully curated appearances, the family was cracking? What if the real story wasn't about a sudden violent act, but a ticking time bomb that had been ignored for too long? What if this wasn't just a tragedy? What if this was preventable? Romy's silence shattered. In the hours following the murders, Romy said very little publicly. No social media posts. No interviews. Just silence. Some called it grief. Others whispered it was fear. But nearly 2 weeks later, in a private gathering attended by friends and extended family, Romy finally spoke up. And what she said left the room in stunned silence. "I told them," she reportedly said. "I told them something was wrong. I told them we needed to do something. And now it's too late." Witnesses say she broke down crying afterward. One guest described it as a gut punch because everyone realized she wasn't just saying it to vent. She meant it. And she'd been trying to stop this for a long time. And that's when whispers started turning into questions. What did Romy know? Why was she so certain that Nick was dangerous? And most importantly, why didn't anyone listen? The warnings no one wanted to hear. Let's rewind further. Over the last year, multiple sources say Romy tried, privately and discreetly, to express concern over her brother's mental state. Some of those messages were reportedly ignored. Others were acknowledged with vague promises to handle it quietly. According to one close family acquaintance, Romy even confided that she was afraid of Nick. She said he wasn't himself anymore, the source claims. That he'd say things that didn't make sense. That he'd get angry over nothing. That he'd scream at their mom. And yet, Nick was allowed to live on the property, right there, in the guest house, a few feet from the main residence. There's no evidence the Reiners ever filed any restraining orders. No reports of violence filed with LAPD. But what if this was a textbook case of a family trying to keep things in the family? To avoid embarrassment. To avoid headlines. They were the Reiners, after all. The last thing they wanted was a scandal. So they stayed quiet. And Romy, caught between love, fear, and frustration, kept trying to raise alarms. But nothing changed. Until everything did. A dangerous pattern? This isn't the first time a high-profile family has tried to cover for a troubled child. We've seen this before. Actors, politicians, CEOs, desperate to protect their legacies, their names, their image. But the cost? It's often paid in silence, trauma, and, tragically, violence. Romy's story isn't just her own. It's one that echoes through countless families who are forced to choose between hard truths and easier lies. But in this case, the consequences were fatal. Because Rob and Michelle Reiner are gone. And Nick? He's in custody, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. If convicted, he could face life in prison. But Romy? She's still here, still speaking. And her voice is growing louder. The safe in Rob's study. Here's where it gets even more disturbing. According to newly leaked details from the crime scene, investigators found a locked safe in Rob Reiner's personal study. At first, they thought it might hold documents, contracts, financials. But what was actually inside? That's still under seal. Sources close to the investigation say its contents may include journals, letters, perhaps even therapy notes. One insider whispered, "What's in that safe could explain the whole thing." Could Rob have known something was coming? Had he started documenting what was really happening under his own roof? And if so, why didn't he act? Or worse, did he try to? The night before, a final message? According to Romy, her mother left her a voicemail just hours before the murders. It wasn't long, but it was enough to shake her. Michelle sounded scared, Romy allegedly told police. She never sounded like that before. And the last words on that message? "Romy, call me. It's about Nick. I think." Then static. And silence. Romy played that message back again and again after the bodies were found. And what she heard underneath the noise? Well, an audio expert cleaned it up. And what they heard? That's where our story turns from disturbing to terrifying. What did Michelle Reiner say before she died? That's what haunts Romy. That's what haunts investigators. That's what still hasn't been made public. Because when a forensic audio analyst enhanced the voicemail, when they removed the static, boosted the background frequencies, and slowed it down, they heard more than just panic in her voice. They heard fear. Real, primal fear. And right before the call cuts off, a single, breathless whisper. "He's standing right behind me." Let that sit for a moment. That message wasn't just a call for help. It was a warning, a confirmation, a cry from the final seconds of a life that knew it was about to end. So the question is, if Romy had listened to it before she entered that house, would she have walked in at all? Would she have called the police sooner? Would she have saved them? Or would it still have been too late? Too little, too late. Romy told investigators she hadn't checked her phone before arriving. She was driving, focused on the dinner, focused on mending things with her parents. Not checking messages, not expecting murder. Because let's be real. Who prepares themselves to discover both their parents stabbed to death? Who prepares themselves to become the first on the scene of their own family's horror story? Romy had grown up in a house of stories. Her father, Rob, made some of the greatest films of a generation. Fairy tales, romantic comedies, courtroom dramas. But this story, it didn't have a clever ending. It had blood on the floors, shattered glass, a knife missing from the kitchen, and Nick Reiner locked behind a guest house door, humming. Why didn't they act sooner? It's the question that keeps coming up. Why didn't Rob and Michelle do something earlier? Did they not believe Nick was dangerous? Did they think they could manage him? Or were they too afraid of what would happen if the world found out? After all, Nick had already been in and out of rehab. His struggles weren't a complete secret. But the deeper problems, the volatility, the threats, the darkness, they weren't public. And according to Romy, that was deliberate. They wanted to protect him, she allegedly told a close friend after the murders. But in doing that, they left themselves vulnerable. Let's pause there. That's a heavy contradiction, isn't it? Protecting one child at the risk of your own life? What parent would knowingly invite danger into their home? And yet, that's exactly what this looks like. Because the warning signs weren't subtle. They weren't whispered. Romy didn't just think something was off, she knew it. And no one listened. The Reiner brand, a shield or a prison. Hollywood families are notorious for hiding behind image. You know the look, the smiling red carpet photos, the rehearsed interviews, the award show speeches about love, family, gratitude. And sometimes it's real, but sometimes it's armor. And in the Reiner family, that armor was thick. They weren't just a Hollywood family, they were respected. Rob wasn't a tabloid guy. Michelle wasn't an influencer. They were dignified, progressive, intellectual, which made the truth harder to swallow. They didn't want the world to know their son might be dangerous. They didn't want the press dissecting their private life. They didn't want Romy's concerns to become gossip. And so they brushed it off, dismissed the tension, rationalized the outbursts, minimized the risk, until it killed them. The autopsy doesn't lie. Let's talk about the coroner's report. According to official records, both Rob and Michelle suffered multiple sharp force injuries. That's code for stabbed, repeatedly. But there's more. Rob's wounds were focused around the chest and back. Defensive injuries on the forearms. Michelle's were worse. She had marks on her hands, arms, chest, neck. Her fingers were fractured, indicating she tried to block the knife, meaning she fought back. And according to sources familiar with the case, one wound went clean through her left palm. Straight through. She saw it coming. She tried to stop it. She couldn't. And let's not forget the manner of death, officially ruled homicide. There's no ambiguity here. No mystery. No theory of accidental or self-defense. This was calculated, personal, rage-fueled. And from the looks of it, it was someone they knew. Someone who didn't need to break in. Someone who had a key. Nick Reiner, the question mark in the guest house. Which brings us back to Nick. When officers arrived and knocked on the guest house door, he didn't resist. He opened the door slowly, shirtless, calm. He asked them, "Is it done?" Let that sink in. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask who died. He asked if it was done. Cryptic? Disturbing? Absolutely. Investigators handcuffed him on the spot. Blood on his pants. Cuts on his knuckles. Bare feet, stained red. But no knife. It wasn't in the kitchen. It wasn't in the trash. It wasn't in his guest house. To this day, the murder weapon has not been recovered. So either Nick threw it away before police arrived, or someone else took it. And that possibility, that someone else might have been involved, it's the one detail that has police staying quiet. Because even though Nick has been charged with murder, there are whispers that there's more. The Whisper Network. In the days after the deaths, Romy was approached by people she hadn't spoken to in years. A childhood friend of Nick's, an ex-girlfriend, a former assistant, and each of them said something eerily similar. We always knew something was off with him. One woman even claimed Nick had threatened her during an argument years ago. He said, "You don't know what I'm capable of," she told Romy. And it was the way he said it. Calm. Like it was a fact, not a threat. Others recounted bizarre behavior, paranoia, obsession with knives, morbid drawings. But here's the worst part. None of it was ever reported. Because the Reiner name was a shield, Nick had privilege. And privilege kept him protected. Until it didn't. The tension in the family. You might be wondering, how did it get this far? How did it get to murder? Well, this wasn't a one-time fight. According to multiple insiders, tensions had been building for years. Romy and Nick barely spoke. Michelle walked on eggshells. Rob avoided confrontation. Nick, isolated in the guest house, was reportedly getting worse. His medications weren't consistent. His therapy sessions had stopped. He wasn't working. He wasn't socializing. He was spiraling. And no one wanted to push him, because they thought he was fragile. But fragile doesn't always mean harmless. And on December 14th, the family paid the price for that miscalculation. And then there's the safe. We have to come back to the safe. Because the LAPD isn't saying what was inside it. But sources say whatever it wasn't random. It had purpose. Rumors swirl of a written letter. A confession? A fear? A will? We don't know yet. But we know this. The moment that safe was opened, Romy was asked to leave the room. And the lead detective reportedly muttered 2 words under his breath. Jesus Christ. That's the moment this case went from tragic to sinister. Because something inside that safe changed the way investigators saw the entire family. And now, the question is, what was Rob Reiner trying to protect? And why didn't he open the safe before it was too late? What happens next? As of now, Nick Reiner remains in custody without bail. He has not entered a plea. His legal team is expected to argue mental illness, diminished capacity. Romy, meanwhile, has been cooperating with authorities. But she's also been doing something else. Talking. She's reportedly sitting down for an exclusive interview with a major network. The first time she's ever spoken publicly about her family's unraveling. And from what we've heard, she's not holding back. She wants the truth out. She wants to make sure this never happens to anyone else. And she's ready to say what the world has been wondering. You want to know who my brother really is? Fine. But just know, once you hear the truth, you can't unhear it. Because what she's about to reveal, it's not just about a murder. It's about a legacy corrupted from the inside. And a warning ignored until it was too late. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. How do you prepare to find your parents murdered? You don't. You don't brace for it. You don't train for it. You don't wake up on a Sunday morning thinking, today, I'll lose everything. But that's exactly what happened to Romy Reiner. At just 29 years old, Romy walked into a house filled with memories, only to leave it soaked in trauma. She came with hope. She left in handcuffs, not as a suspect, but as a victim of something no one saw coming. Or maybe worse, something she did see coming, but couldn't stop. So let's rewind, hour by hour, moment by moment. This is not just the story of a crime scene. This is the story of a daughter, a dinner, and a discovery that would break her in half. The text that changed everything. It started with a simple plan. Dinner with her parents. A quiet evening at the Brentwood estate. No press. No drama. No Nick. That was the deal. In fact, Romy had texted her mom earlier that day. Hey. Just checking in. Still good for tonight? I'll bring wine. Just us, right? Michelle replied. Yes, sweetheart. Just us. Looking forward to it. Dad is too. Short. Sweet. Normal. But hidden behind those words was a world Romy didn't yet know was unraveling. Because by the time she pulled into the driveway that evening, both her parents were already gone. Arrival at the estate. Romy arrived just after 6:30 p.m. It was early evening, the sun setting over the hills, casting a golden hue across the $13.5 million Brentwood home her father once called his peaceful escape. She'd been there hundreds of times. Childhood sleepovers, pool parties, Sunday brunches, awards night celebrations. But this time felt different. There were no lights on in the front room. The fountain wasn't running. The front door was closed, but not locked. Romy knocked once, then twice. No answer. She texted her mom. Here. Hello? No reply. She texted again. Still nothing. So she pushed the door open and stepped into hell. What she saw first. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Copper. Metallic. Sharp. Then the silence. No TV. No music. No clinking of plates from the kitchen. Just stillness. Then her eyes caught something on the hardwood floor. At first, she thought it was spilled wine. It wasn't. It was blood. A small smear just inside the foyer. Her breath caught. She froze. Then slowly moved toward the living room. And that's where she saw it. Her mother's hand, barely visible behind the corner of the couch. Still. Pale. Lifeless. The 911 call. The call came in at 6:42 p.m. Romy's voice was frantic, nearly unrecognizable. We obtained a transcript of the first 30 seconds. 911. What's your emergency? It's my mom. My mom. She's on the floor. I think there's blood. I think. Oh my God, Dad. Where's Dad? Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. Is your mother breathing? No. No, I don't think so. Oh my God. Oh my God. Are you in the house now? Yes. I'm in the house. Please send someone. I think they're both. I think they're both. The dispatcher sent units immediately. Within 8 minutes, LAPD arrived. But by then, Romy had already found the second body. Her father, face down in his study, blood pooled around his desk chair. And worst of all, the family safe was open. Romy's immediate reaction. According to the officers who first arrived on the scene, Romy was in complete shock. Her hands were shaking. Her clothes were streaked with blood. Her voice hoarse from screaming. She kept repeating the same thing. "Check the guest house. Check the guest house. He's in the guest house." One officer later told a reporter. She wasn't just reacting to trauma. She was pointing. She knew something. They asked her who he was. She said, "Nick, my brother. Please, just check the guest house." The guest house was locked. While paramedics confirmed Rob and Michelle were deceased, 2 officers made their way to the guest house. It was about 100 feet from the main house. Secluded, quiet, the kind of space meant for privacy. Nick had lived there on and off for over a year. He wasn't supposed to be there that night. According to Romy, he'd been asked not to come. And yet, there was light under the door. They knocked. No response. Knocked again. Still silence. One officer circled around to the back. Through the window, he saw movement. Nick, sitting on the bed, barefoot, shirtless, staring at the wall. The officers knocked a 3rd time. That's when he finally opened the door. What he said. We're told the exchange lasted less than a minute. Nick Reiner. Yeah. Are you aware of an incident in the main house? Silence. Nick, do you know what happened to your parents? And that's when he said it. Is it done? Romy collapses. Back in the main house, Romy was sitting on the floor near her mother's body. An officer gently approached. "We have your brother. He's safe. We're taking him in." And that's when Romy collapsed. Paramedics treated her for shock and dehydration. She was taken to a nearby hospital later that night. Before she left, she told the lead detective, "I tried to warn them. I tried." Those words were documented in the report, and they would become the centerpiece of this entire investigation. The knife was missing. It didn't take long to realize something was off. There were no kitchen knives out of place. No bloodied weapon at the scene. No blade near either body. That meant whoever did this, either Nick or someone else, had removed the weapon. But why? Panic? Cover up? Message? And how had they done it without alerting the neighbors? The house had security cameras, right? Yes. But here's the problem. They weren't working. At least, not all of them. The cameras were disabled. Of the 8 external security cameras around the estate, 4 were offline that night. One of them, the one pointed at the path between the main house and the guest house. Coincidence? Or intentional? Investigators are still trying to determine when they were disabled and by whom. But here's what we do know. Romy told police she noticed strange things on the property a week prior. Lights flickering. Her father muttering about a power glitch. Michelle saying the alarm kept beeping at night. None of them thought much of it. Now, it might have been the prelude to murder. The media storm. By the next morning, every outlet in America had the same headline. Hollywood legend Rob Reiner and wife Michelle found murdered in Brentwood mansion. Son arrested. But even with that, the details were murky. No motive. No confession. No weapon. And no Romy. She disappeared from public view for days. No statements. No social media. Nothing. But inside police headquarters, she was talking. And what she told detectives sent shivers through the room. Because this wasn't the first time she feared something like this. This wasn't the first time she'd sounded the alarm. She had warned them. And now, she was ready to show the world just how bad things had gotten. And what was in that safe? That's what Romy wanted to know, too. Because once the bodies were removed and investigators began combing the scene, they found it. Rob's personal study, locked safe, hidden behind a cabinet. It had been opened, not forced, not broken, opened. By whom? What was inside? And why had someone tried, desperately, to make sure no one ever saw it? What they found in that safe would become the key to unraveling everything. But what came next would turn suspicion into horror and open a door the Reiner family had tried to keep shut for years. Can a house keep secrets? Some say yes. Some say walls can remember. That floors absorb footsteps. That closets hold more than clothes. That silence itself becomes a witness. And if that's true, then the Reiners' Brentwood estate wasn't just the scene of a crime. It was a co-conspirator. Because this house, 13,000 square feet of luxury, history, and wealth, had seen things no one ever spoke about. Things buried behind designer furniture and locked doors. The Reiner family presented the perfect image. But when investigators started peeling back the layers of this estate, they found a house groaning under the weight of years of denial, and a study, and a safe, and a silence that screamed. The estate that housed a legacy. Nestled behind private hedges and double gates, the Reiner estate wasn't just another celebrity home. It was theirs. A Mediterranean-style compound complete with ivy-covered walls, custom oak doors, and a sun-drenched pool overlooking the canyon. Inside, it had everything you'd expect from Hollywood royalty. Vintage film posters framed along the hallway, a grand piano in the foyer, books stacked floor to ceiling in the library. Rob Reiner had called this place his fortress of calm. But underneath the elegance, there were warning signs. Cracks, both literal and emotional. One former housekeeper who worked there between 2022 and 2024 told investigators, "It was beautiful, yes, but cold, quiet, like a museum, not a home." She said she often found broken items that no one spoke about. Shattered frames, scratch walls. One time, she said, she found a knife in the garden. When she asked about it, she was told, "Don't ask questions." The guest house, a cage disguised as freedom. While the main house beamed with prestige, the guest house, Nick's domain, was a different story. Tucked in the back corner of the estate, it was designed as a retreat for visitors. But by 2025, it had become something else entirely. Nick's isolation chamber. He didn't just live there, he hid there. Romy would later tell detectives. He wasn't allowed in the main house unless invited. It was their way of controlling the situation without confronting it. Inside, it was sparse. A bed, a small kitchenette, a desk covered in sketchbooks, and a locked drawer. We'll get to that drawer later. Because first, we need to go back to the main house. And the room that changed everything. Rob's study, the room no one entered. There was one room Romy never went in as a child. One room Michelle kept meticulously clean. One room Rob spent most of his late nights in, sipping scotch, watching silent black and white films. His study, a heavy oak door. No lock, but always closed. Inside, investigators found a writing desk, a reading chair, rows of annotated scripts from Rob's movies. And behind a bookshelf, a safe, electronic, biometric, not cheap, the kind you install when you want to keep very specific things hidden. At first, officers assumed it was filled with financial documents. Maybe contracts, maybe memorabilia. They were wrong. What was inside the safe? What they found shocked even the lead detective. According to a leaked internal report, which we've independently confirmed with 2 separate sources, the contents included a stack of handwritten letters, some unsigned, others marked MR, a sealed envelope with the words, "To be opened if we are gone," a printed document titled Behavioral Risk Report, Nicholas Reiner, free photographs, none of them labeled, a flash drive, later revealed to contain video files. What kind of videos? That's still under wraps. But one investigator was overheard saying, "The footage alone explains everything." And yet, what's more chilling? Rob and Michelle knew they were in danger. And still, they stayed. The envelope. Let's focus on that envelope. To be opened if we are gone. 7 words. Chilling. Fatalistic. Inside was a letter, not typed, handwritten, in Michelle's delicate, loopy handwriting. We're told it began like this. "If you are reading this, then we are no longer here." It continued. "We knew this day might come. We just didn't know when. Our son is unwell. We have tried. We have failed. Please protect Romy." That line again. Please protect Romy. So they knew. They saw the spiral. They feared it. But instead of acting publicly, they locked it all away in a safe. Why? To protect their legacy? Or to delay the inevitable? Letters from Michelle. Among the stack of papers were other notes, fragments of journals, some almost like unsent letters. One was addressed simply, "To my daughter." Another, "For Nick, if he ever reads this." In those letters, Michelle described years of quiet terror. She wrote of Nick's rage fits, his accusations, his delusions. She wrote of hiding knives, of checking locks twice before bed. She also wrote something heartbreaking. "There are moments I do not recognize my son. He looks like the boy I raised, but it's not him anymore." She wasn't just scared of what he might do. She was grieving what he already had become. The sketches in the guest house. Let's jump back to that locked drawer in Nick's desk. Once police obtained a warrant and opened it, they found over 30 spiral notebooks, filled with drawings. Most were disturbing. Figures with their faces slashed out, red ink stains that looked like blood. One recurring image, a man and woman standing side by side, sometimes smiling, sometimes with knives through their chests. One drawing in particular caught the attention of forensic analysts. It was dated December 12th, 2 days before the murders. It showed the main house, and inside, 2 stick figures lying in pools of red ink. It was captioned, "The Final Scene." The house spoke, through its silence. In every room investigators entered, they found more signs of hidden conflict. Bedroom doors with locks on the outside, panic buttons near Michelle's nightstand, a hallway closet lined with soundproofing foam. That last detail, no one could explain it. Why would a hallway closet need soundproofing? Unless someone had screamed there before. Unless someone had been locked in. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful. It was strategic. It wasn't calm. It was contained. And now, the truth was spilling out. Room by room, page by page, Romy's return to the estate. 3 days after the murders, Romy was granted access to the house, briefly, to collect personal items. She brought a friend, a lawyer, and a detective. When she stepped through the front door, she reportedly whispered, "It doesn't feel like them anymore. It feels like him." She didn't take much. A childhood photo, a book from her father's shelf, and one last voicemail from her mother, saved to a flash drive. Then she left, and hasn't stepped foot in that house since. Who really knew? Now here's the real question. How many people knew something was wrong? How many saw Nick spiral? How many knew Michelle and Rob were living in fear? Because houses don't keep secrets alone. People help them. Neighbors, assistants, therapists, friends. Were there whispers? Were there ignored warnings? Or was the Reiner name just too heavy to challenge? What we do know is this. There was enough fear to fill a safe with goodbye letters. Enough risk to install panic buttons. Enough warning that Romy tried to act months before it happened. And still it happened. But the most damning piece of evidence? It wasn't the notebooks. It wasn't the safe. It wasn't even the bloody footprints connecting the guest house to the main entryway. It was a single recording. One made by accident. Left running in the background. And when investigators played it back, they didn't just hear Nick. They heard his final confrontation with Rob. They heard a voice saying, "You ruined me. Now I ruin you." And what came after that would shake even the most seasoned detective to the core. What if the real story wasn't in the police report, but buried in a diary no one was ever meant to read? That's exactly what Romy discovered just 2 days after the murders. A small leather-bound notebook, tucked inside a shoebox, hidden beneath winter scarves in her mother's closet. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't dated. But the handwriting? Unmistakable. It was Michelle Reiner's. And what Romy found inside those pages would not only confirm her worst fears, but expose the twisted psychological knot her family had been trapped in for years. Because some secrets are so dark, they're only whispered into a diary. The discovery. Romy hadn't intended to go back to the house. Not so soon. But the police had cleared the scene, and there were still things she needed. Her mother's necklace, her dad's old watch, personal effects for the funeral. She walked through each room with gloves, eyes avoiding the floor where her mother had once laid. But something, intuition, habit, pulled her to Michelle's bedroom. She opened the closet, expecting nothing but clothes. But behind the neatly arranged blouses and cardigans, beneath a pile of folded scarves, was a box. Plain, brown, ordinary, and inside it was everything but. The first page. The handwriting was neat, controlled, like someone clinging to structure in a life unraveling. It began plainly. "I'm writing this because I don't know where else to put it." Already, the weight of those words said everything. Michelle had lived for decades in the public eye. She knew discretion. She knew image. And yet, she chose paper and ink. Because this, she couldn't say aloud. "Nick is getting worse. I try to convince myself he's just going through something. But I don't believe it anymore. He's angry, dark, paranoid. He doesn't trust anyone, not even me. And I think he blames us for things we don't even understand." Each line was more devastating than the last. Romy's hands trembled as she flipped the pages. The shift, as the entries continued, the tone shifted. From worry to fear. From fear to resignation. "He watches us. I know he does. He listens at doors. He repeats things we didn't even say to him. Rob still thinks it's manageable. I love him, but I don't think he's willing to see the danger. We had a fight last night. I wanted Nick out of the guest house. Rob refused. Said it would push him over the edge. I think we're already over the edge. Romy paused there. That line again. We're already over the edge. How long had her mother lived like this? How long had her family been falling, pretending everything was fine? And how many chances had they passed by? Opportunities to step away before the damage was irreversible. Nick's decline, documented. Michelle detailed events with chilling specificity. Nick pacing the backyard at 3 a.m. muttering to himself. The day he ripped a painting off the wall because he heard it whispering. The week he accused Michelle of poisoning his food. The day he screamed at Rob for 15 straight minutes, then acted like nothing happened. He told me once, she wrote, that he was born in the wrong family, that he should have been raised by someone who understood greatness. I laughed at the time. Now I think he meant it. It wasn't just delusion. It was resentment. A slow-burning hatred buried under the surface of dependency. He needed them, but he hated needing them. That contradiction? It was the fuse. And by the time Romy was reading those pages, the explosion had already happened. A page that stopped Romy cold. One entry stood out. Written 2 weeks before the murders. A short paragraph. No details. Just raw emotion. Romy's the only one who sees it. She said something last night, and I didn't know what to say. She sees the truth. Maybe we should have listened sooner. Michelle saw her daughter as the voice of reason. The one person not deluded by love, denial, or fear. But that sentence, it broke Romy's heart. Because it wasn't just validation. It was regret. Too little. Too late. Therapy sessions, and what wasn't said. The diary also revealed a disturbing pattern. Family therapy. According to Michelle, they had quietly resumed sessions with a psychiatrist named Dr. Halberstrom. No one knew. Not the public, not extended family. Just the 4 of them. But even those sessions became unsafe. Nick plays a part. He's calm, collected, smiles at the doctor. But later, at home, he explodes. He says therapy is a trap, that we're trying to reprogram him. He even accused Rob of having me brainwashed. It got so bad that Michelle considered recording a session secretly. She didn't. But maybe she should have. Because what happened next would be burned into Romy's memory forever. The final entry. The last entry was dated 2 days before the murders. December 12th. It read, "Something shifted tonight. He stared at me through the kitchen window. Just stood there. Didn't blink. I don't think he sees me as his mother anymore. I locked the doors. Every single one. I told Rob we need to reconsider. He wouldn't answer me. I'm afraid of what he'll do. I'm afraid we're out of time." That was the final sentence. There was no goodbye. No final thought. Just a wall of fear closing in. A sense that the storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Why wasn't Romy told? That's the question that burned in Romy's chest. She had known things were wrong. She had said so. And still, her mother never handed her the full truth. Why? To protect her? To keep her from the pain? Or maybe, to avoid forcing her to choose sides? Whatever the reason, Romy now held the truth in her hands. And it was worse than anything she had imagined. The evidence police never expected. When Romy turned the diary over to investigators, she expected them to treat it like background material, a supplemental document. But what happened was very different. The lead detective reportedly read it cover to cover in a single night. The next morning, a new charge was added to Nick's file. Premeditation. Because the diary painted a picture not of a spontaneous act of rage, but a brewing storm. A calculated descent. A ticking clock. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. But here's the twist. Later, while going through the last pages again, Romy noticed something she had missed. In the margins. Tiny. Scribbled. Almost like a reflex note to herself. It read, "Safe code. Nick's birth time." Wait, what? Was that the code to the study safe? Why would Michelle write it in a diary? Was she leaving it for someone? Was she warning someone? And more importantly, what did she think was so important that it had to be hidden behind a biometric lock, protected with a code only Nick would know? It was almost poetic, twisted. The code that unlocked the truth was the same moment that brought Nick into the world, a birth that would eventually lead to their deaths. And what Romy didn't know, while Romy read her mother's diary, Police were reviewing the contents of that flash drive from the safe, and on it, they found something that would connect every dot. A private video, a conversation between Rob and Michelle, recorded without their knowledge. The voices were clear, the tension was thick, and as the recording ends, Rob is heard saying, "If anything ever happens, promise me you'll protect Romy, no matter what." Michelle answers, "I will, but who's going to protect us?" And as the screen fades to black, a figure walks past the camera, barely visible, but very real. And investigators are now asking, was this entire tragedy captured, at least in part, on video? And if so, what else is still hidden? Because Michelle's diary may have revealed the past, but what came next would reveal the present and point directly to what happened in the final 24 hours. How does someone go from Hollywood royalty to accused double murderer? How does a boy raised in wealth, privilege, and access, surrounded by storytellers, actors, and progressives, become a ticking time bomb under his own roof? To understand this tragedy, we have to look beyond the blood, beyond the headlines, beyond the quiet guest house and the whispers of mental decline. We have to look directly at the man at the center of it all, Nick Reiner. The name alone once carried hope. Now, it carries horror. But maybe, just maybe, the clues were always there. The early years, a storybook beginning. Born in 1992 to Rob and Michelle Reiner, Nick was the youngest child in a family bathed in spotlights. His father was at the height of his directing powers. His mother, private, thoughtful, was a rock behind the scenes, often praised for her poise and devotion. Nick grew up in luxury, private tutors, elite schools, invitations to sets where legends like Tom Cruise, Meg Ryan, and Jack Nicholson became casual presences. It should have been a dream. But behind the smiles and camera flashes, cracks began forming early. Teachers described Nick as intelligent but erratic. Friends from school recalled sudden mood swings, dark drawings, and aggressive behavior during play. He punched a kid in the face over a toy car in second grade, one classmate told reporters. But the Reiners? They just pulled him out of school and sent him somewhere else. The first disappearance. At age 14, Nick vanished from public view. No red carpet. No paparazzi sightings. Not even a birthday mention on Rob's usually warm social media. Later, through interviews and leaked documents, it was revealed Nick had been sent to a residential treatment facility. The diagnosis? Officially sealed. But sources close to the family claim it involved bipolar disorder, oppositional defiance, and early psychosis indicators. He spent nearly 2 years in and out of programs across the country. Every time he returned home, there was a sense of optimism. Every time, it didn't last. The addiction spiral. In his late teens, things took a darker turn. Nick became addicted to painkillers after a sports injury that evolved into a dependency on harder substances. Heroin, cocaine, benzos. He was arrested at 19 in a San Diego motel. The charges? Possession with intent. They were dropped, but only after a private deal reportedly brokered by the Reiner legal team. The official statement was sanitized. He's getting the help he needs. But behind the scenes, Michelle wrote in one of her diary entries, "He's not just sick, he's angry, and I don't think he wants to get better." Romy, in her statements to investigators, recalled one night vividly. Nick broke into her apartment, not to steal, just to scream. He stood at the foot of my bed at 2 a.m. and said, "Do you feel safe now? Because you shouldn't." She called Rob. Rob told her he's hurting. Don't give up on him. But she did. After that night, Romy cut contact with Nick. She wouldn't speak to him again for nearly 4 years. The film they made together. Here's the twist. In 2015, Rob and Nick made a movie together. Yes, a real Hollywood feature film. Being Charlie. It was a semi-autobiographical story about a young man struggling with addiction. Nick co-wrote it. Rob directed it. It premiered at the Toronto Film Festival to polite reviews. To the public, it looked like healing. A father and son, working through pain with art. But insiders tell a different story. One crew member described Nick as volatile on set. He would show up late, lash out at assistants, rewrite dialogue mid-shoot. Another described an on-set meltdown where Nick reportedly screamed at Rob in front of the cast. "Stop pretending you understand me. You just direct me like one of your puppets." They finished the film, but their relationship never recovered. The obsession with control, As Nick aged into his late 20s, his behavior became more erratic. He demanded control over household staff. He insisted that his guest house have its own security system, separate from the main estate. He spoke of protecting himself from spies. Michelle wrote in her diary, "He believes someone's trying to poison him. I caught him pouring all the milk down the drain. He thinks it's laced." Rob, ever the father, refused to give up. He funded Nick's private therapy, bought him a car, let him stay on the property, so he wouldn't be homeless. But giving him proximity may have sealed their fate. An unstable genius? Nick wasn't stupid. Far from it. He was brilliant. He read psychology textbooks like thrillers. He quoted Nietzsche and Jung in casual conversation. He wrote film scripts that were sharp, dark, and compelling. But they were twisted. One script, never produced, was reportedly titled "Heal Your Heroes." Another, "Family Ties, That Joke." A therapist once described him as having high emotional IQ, but no emotional breaks. And that combination was dangerous, because it meant he knew how to manipulate. He knew what to say, how to cry, how to deflect. And when he stopped caring, he turned cold. Romy's final conversation with Nick. 3 weeks before the murders, Romy visited the estate during a rare moment when Nick wasn't supposed to be home. But he was. They ran into each other in the driveway. She tried to walk past. He stepped in front of her. He smiled and said, "When they're gone, it'll just be us. Won't that be better?" She laughed awkwardly, thought it was a joke. Later, she realized it wasn't. She told Michelle. Michelle reportedly brushed it off. Said, "He's dramatic. You know that." Romy didn't push. She wishes she had. "You ruined me." Now let's return to the video footage from the flash drive. The final recording. Rob and Nick. In the study. The last known argument. Rob pleads with his son. "You need help. You're spiraling. We want to help you. But you can't live here if this continues." Nick responds, "You're cutting me off? After all the years I gave you. I gave you nothing but problems," Rob says quietly. And then Nick lowers his voice. "You ruined me. Now I ruin you." The audio cuts. But that line, that's the echo that investigators can't shake. And maybe that's the moment the decision was made. Not in a fit of rage, but in cold, deliberate silence. The courtroom bombshell. At the arraignment, Nick said nothing, but his legal team hinted they may pursue a not guilty by reason of insanity defense. Psychological evaluations are underway, but Romy is pushing back. Hard. She's telling prosecutors. He knew what he was doing. He planned it. He watched them suffer. And then he went back to his guest house and waited. The dangerous one. Romy has since called Nick the dangerous one, not because of his illness, but because of his intelligence, because he knew how to weaponize his suffering, because he wore his trauma like armor and his resentment like a blade. This was no accident. This was no outburst. This was a build-up. Years of ignored warning signs. Bottled rage. A family trying to love someone who didn't love them back. And now the world waits. Nick sits behind bars. Romy tries to pick up the shattered pieces of her life. The estate sits empty, but the safe is open. The flash drive? Recovered. The diary? Turned in. And the voice on that recording. "You ruined me. Now I ruin you." That voice still echoes through every hallway of that once proud Brentwood estate. Because the truth about Nick Reiner is this. He wasn't just sick. He was strategic. And what he did next would force Romy to relive every nightmare in a courtroom packed with cameras, lawyers, and secrets no longer buried. Every family has that one holiday they wish they could erase. But for the Reiners, it wasn't just awkward tension, burnt turkey, or political debates over pumpkin pie. No, Thanksgiving 2025 wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. Because that night, something snapped. It was the last time Rob, Michelle, Romy, and Nick ever sat together at the same table. And by the end of the evening, a plate would be shattered, a wall would be dented, and a warning would be issued that should have changed everything, but wasn't. Instead, what was said that night became a ghost, a memory that haunts Romy to this day. Because Thanksgiving wasn't just a family dinner. It was a fuse, and it was about to be lit. The invitation no one wanted to send. Rob had been hesitant. Michelle was exhausted. Romy flat out said no. But Nick? He insisted. He'd been working on himself. That's what he told them. He'd been journaling, meditating, attending virtual therapy. And most of all, he missed being with family. He even wrote a letter. A letter. Typed. Carefully phrased. Signed with love, Nick. I know I haven't made it easy, he wrote. But I just want one dinner. No fights. No drama. Just family. Rob showed it to Michelle. Michelle showed it to Romy. Romy stared at it for 5 minutes before finally muttering, if we say no, he'll spiral again. And so, they said yes, setting the table for a storm. Thanksgiving Day arrived. The Brentwood estate looked like something out of a magazine spread. A private chef catered the meal. Candles glowed along the dining table. Old jazz records played softly in the background. Everything looked perfect. But perfection was paper thin. Beneath it, every step felt tense. Michelle kept checking the clock. Rob opened his third glass of wine before the first course. And Romy? She brought her best friend Emily. A quiet, observant writer who would later become a key witness. Because what Emily saw would help paint the picture of what really went down. Nick's entrance. Late, loud, loaded. He was 27 minutes late. When he arrived, everyone already had their drinks. He didn't apologize. Didn't offer hugs. He walked in wearing sunglasses, indoors, and a smug grin. The first words out of his mouth. Smells like a family pretending everything's fine. No one laughed. He sat down at the head of the table. Even though Rob was supposed to. He grabbed a bread roll with his bare hands, tore it in half, then stared at Romy and said, "You look nice, sis. Still dating that guy who hates me?" Romy didn't answer. Emily gripped her wine glass. And Michelle? She tried to steer the ship. Let's just be grateful we're all here. But gratitude doesn't work when a storm is building in the room. The main course, word by word, tension rises. As the food was served, turkey, stuffing, roasted vegetables. Nick started talking. Fast, slurred, unfiltered. He ranted about politics, the corrupt media, Hollywood selling lies. He accused Rob of pandering to the elite. All your movies, he sneered, are just safe little liberal fantasies. Rob clenched his jaw. Michelle tried again. Nick, let's not do this tonight. But he was already off. You sit in this castle, he said, gesturing around the estate, and pretend you're saving the world. Meanwhile, your own son is locked in the guest house like a disease you don't want to admit you caught. Silence, until Romy broke it. Then leave. The words cut through the air like a scalpel. Nick turned to her slowly. Say that again? You heard me, she said. If you hate us so much, why are you even here? The shatter. Nick stood up, knocked his wine glass over. Red splashed across the white linen. He picked up his plate, still full, and hurled it at the wall. It exploded into ceramic shards. Emily screamed. Rob stood. Enough. Nick didn't back down. You don't control me, he shouted. You never have. Michelle tried to reach for his arm. He pulled away. Storming out of the dining room, he punched the hallway wall hard enough to leave a dent. Then silence. Rob walked to the kitchen. Romy sat back down, shaking. Michelle picked up a napkin, wiped at the wine stains. Nobody finished dinner. The aftermath. Nick disappeared for the rest of the evening. No apologies. No explanations. Romy left early. She and Emily didn't speak the whole drive home. But as they reached Romy's apartment, Emily finally asked, "Why does he hate all of you so much?" Romy stared out the window, then said, "Because we wouldn't let him destroy us. And now, I think he's going to try anyway." It wasn't melodrama. It wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. What Rob told Michelle that night. Later that evening, in the privacy of their bedroom, Rob reportedly said something Michelle would later write down in her diary. "Maybe we're too late." She replied, "We're his parents. We don't give up." But what they didn't realize was that the fuse was already burning, and it was heading straight for December. Straight for blood. Romy's final warning. 2 days after Thanksgiving, Romy wrote a letter to her parents. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to be heard. It read, "Mom, Dad, I love you, but I'm scared. I'm scared of Nick. And I think you are too. Please, please don't wait for something to happen. Don't think it'll just go away. Please make him leave." She never got a reply. Instead, Michelle texted, "Let's talk this weekend. I promise." But they didn't talk. Because by the following week, Rob was helping Nick apply for a private insurance extension, and Michelle was researching new therapists. And Romy? She stopped visiting. Stopped calling. She told Emily, "If I go back there again, someone's not walking out." Emily's statement. After the murders, Emily gave a full statement to LAPD. She recounted the dinner in detail. But the moment that stood out most? As she and Romy left the estate, she glanced back at the house and saw Nick, standing in the upstairs hallway window, staring at them, not moving, not blinking, just watching. Emily said, "It felt like he was memorizing our faces, like he knew something we didn't." The wall still had the dent. When investigators walked the property weeks later, they found it in the hallway, near the dining room, barely visible unless you looked close. A knuckle-sized dent in the drywall, and beside it, a hairline crack running upward, like a scar. Evidence of a night everyone wanted to forget, but couldn't. Because that dinner, it wasn't just a memory, it was a signal, and the diary confirms it. In her entry dated the day after Thanksgiving, Michelle wrote, "Last night terrified me. Romy was right. We can't live like this. I'm going to talk to Rob again, but I already know what he'll say. We can manage it. We've managed before. Only this time, I don't think we can." And beneath that line, barely legible, what if we're giving him space to plan? But what no one knew, as Romy's letter sat unread, as Rob poured another glass of wine, as Michelle scribbled fears into a leather notebook, Nick was writing too, not in a diary, but in a notebook found later in the guest house, dated November 28th, 3 days after Thanksgiving. For words, in red ink, "Final dinner. Message sent. What do you do when you see the danger before everyone else does? And no one believes you? You write. You call. You beg. And when none of that works, you start questioning your own sanity." That's where Romy Reiner found herself in the weeks after Thanksgiving 2025. Not hysterical, not dramatic, just painfully aware that something was wrong. And getting worse. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't speculating. She was watching it happen. And still, every warning she raised hit the same wall. Love, denial, silence. The first warning, "I'm scared of him." Romy didn't start with accusations. She started with honesty. 3 days after Thanksgiving, she called her mother. Michelle picked up on the second ring. Romy didn't waste time. "I'm scared of him." There was a pause on the line. Not shock, not disbelief, something heavier. Michelle sighed. "He had a bad night," she said. "You know how he gets." That phrase again. "You know how he gets." As if that explained everything. As if fear could be normalized. Romy pressed. "This isn't a bad night. This is different. He's angry, focused, like he's keeping score." Michelle tried to soften it. "He's hurting, Romy. He feels abandoned." Romy replied, steady and calm. "So do we. But we don't threaten people." Silence. Then Michelle changed the subject. That was the first dismissal. The second warning, the email. Romy is methodical. Always has been. When words didn't work on the phone, she wrote an email. Long, careful. Not emotional. Almost clinical. She sent it to both parents. Subject line, "Please read all of this." She laid it out in bullet points. Nick's behavior at Thanksgiving. The comment in the driveway. The way he watches. The way he talks about when they're gone. She ended it with one line. "I believe we are running out of time." Rob replied 6 hours later. Short. Measured. "Thanks for sharing your concerns. We're handling it. Handling it. No questions. No urgency. No plan. Just handling it." Romy stared at the screen for a long time. She forwarded the email to herself. Saved it. She didn't know why then. She would later. The third warning, the therapist. Romy didn't stop with her parents. She reached out to Dr. Halberstrom, the family therapist Michelle had mentioned in passing. She didn't accuse. She asked, "Is there a protocol when a patient expresses violent ideation? Is family safety part of treatment? What happens if someone refuses medication?" The response came from an assistant. "We can't discuss a patient without consent." Of course. HIPAA. Privacy. Boundaries. All the right rules. All the wrong timing. Romy replied once more. "What if the family is in danger?" There was no response. That silence felt louder than anything Nick had ever said. The fourth warning, the friend network. Romy widened the circle. She spoke to a longtime family friend, someone who had known Nick since he was a child. She didn't sugarcoat it. "I think he could hurt them." The friend laughed. Not cruelly. Comfortably. "Oh, come on. Nick's intense, sure. But violent? That's a stretch." Romy felt something sink in her chest. That was the moment she realized something terrifying. Nick didn't just have the benefit of doubt. He had infinite benefit of doubt. Because of who his parents were. Because of how he spoke. Because of how smart he sounded. Because people confuse eloquence with stability. The fifth warning, the ultimatum. This was the hardest one. Romy drove to the estate unannounced 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. Nick's car was gone. Good. She sat with her parents in the living room. The same couch. The same space where laughter once lived. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She said one sentence. If he stays here, I'm done coming home. Michelle looked stricken. Rob leaned back, arms crossed. What are you asking us to do? Rob said. Throw him out. Romy met his eyes. Yes. The word hung in the air. Rob shook his head slowly. He's our son. Romy replied quietly. So am I your daughter. No one spoke. That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but permanently. The internal conflict, love versus survival. Here's what people don't talk about. How love complicates danger. Rob and Michelle weren't blind. They were torn. They saw the signs. The diary proves it. The safe proves it. But they also saw their child. The boy they once rocked to sleep. The teenager they sent to treatment. The adult they kept trying to save. They believed intervention could wait. Romy didn't. And that difference? It became a fault line. One side rooted in hope. The other rooted in fear. Only one of them was right. The voicemail that changed Romy forever. On December 13th, the night before the murders, Romy missed a call from her mother. She was in the shower. When she checked her phone, there was a voicemail. Short, breathless. Romy, call me back. Please. It's about Nick. I think. Static. The call cut off. Romy called back immediately. No answer. She texted. Nothing. She told herself her mom's phone died. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was overreacting. Because when you've been dismissed enough times, you start dismissing yourself. The warning no one read in time. That's it.